A shock in the dark.
I'm 23 years old. I'm a female and a gun owner. I've been around guns my whole life, from hunting with my dad to my parents making me learn gun safety and going to the range and practicing at least once a month since I was a kid. I also live in a constitutional carry state, which means I can have a gun on me almost any time I want. Now, even though I know more about guns than most people and own a few guns, I do have some mixed feelings on guns. I'm not opposed to reasonable control, and I do think we should do more about mental health issues in this country, but this story is not political in any way. This is only a story of what happened to me. One person and one scenario. It's an anecdote. It doesn't mean or prove anything. It's just my experience. As I said, I live in a constitutional carry state. That means if I want to go shopping or to the bank with a gun strapped to my hip like it's the Wild West days, I can do it. Or, if I prefer, I can hide my weapon on my person, only revealing it if contacted by law enforcement, or, as the situation dictates, is necessary. I will admit it does make me feel safe. But your personal safety is only as good as your training, so I still practice at a shooting range, usually once a month, sometimes more. So that's my background. Here's what happened. I've been working from home for over a year now. My office has been shut down to COVID. A few weeks ago, I got done with a big project I was working on, only to realize it was already after 10 p.m. and I hadn't eaten all day. I had nothing in my pantry, and there's a Popeyes chicken place a couple of blocks away, so I decided to walk down and get a sandwich. I was standing in line at the Popeyes when somebody walked up behind me and stood real close. I turned around and gave him the "really, dude" look and moved away from him, but he just moved behind me again and got even closer to me than he had been before. I moved again, and so did he. At this point, he's basically pressing up against me from the rear, and I can feel his hot breath in the back of my neck. I just turn around and say in a really loud voice, "Dude, I don't know you and you are way too close. Back off." He did. In fact, he left the store. So I'm walking home with my little combo bag of sandwich, fries, and drink when I hear steps behind me. I glance over my shoulder, and sure enough, it's the creepy guy from the restaurant line. I pick up my pace and make it home, slamming the door behind me and double locking the door. I sit down, relax, eat my chicken sandwich and fries while I scroll around on the TV and eventually go to bed. Somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, I wake up to a noise. I can't quite place it, but it's something that sounds like scratching. I get out of bed and silently make my way around the house. I go downstairs trying my best to track down the noise, but now I'm starting to understand it's coming from the kitchen. Sure enough, the moment I walk into the kitchen, I realize exactly what that sound was. Somebody is trying to pick my lock to my kitchen door. My kitchen door has windows on it, but they're semi-transparent, kind of like glass in showers. It lets light through and you can see that something's on the other side of the glass, but you can't actually tell what it is. The first thing that popped into my mind was to shout, to make this person leave, and that's just what I did. I shouted, "Step away from my door. I will call the police, and I do have a gun, and I'm not afraid to use it." The scratching noises stopped. I took a deep breath and inwardly celebrated my victory. That's when I heard it. The most frightening and disturbing thing I've ever heard. It was a laugh. An evil, condescending laugh. Then he spoke.
Even if you did call the police, they'll be way too late to save you. Even if you have a gun, you can shoot me all you want, but I'm still gonna get you, B-word.
That sent ice through my veins. I turned to go get my gun and phone, both upstairs in my room, when I heard a giant crash. It was the creep and another guy, and they had kicked in my door so hard. The whole door cracked and was barely hanging on to the hinges. The glass was shattered. The deadbolt lock just ripped right through the door frame like it was cardboard. The frame itself was coming out of the wall. My walk up the stairs turned into an all-out sprint. I was about on the third step when I felt the creepy guy grab onto my ankle. It tripped me up, but I was able to break away. But I think it was the other guy, but one of them was able to grab onto the waist of my pajama pants, but I had the forward momentum and the bloodstream full of adrenaline, so the pajamas stretched, but eventually I pulled away. It felt like minutes were rolling by, but I'm sure it was just a matter of seconds. I took a hard right at the top of the stairs and dove across my bed to reach my bedside table drawer. In it was a present that my dad gave me for Christmas last year, shortly before he died in an automobile accident. It was actually a very expensive inside joke. I was always complaining about how weak my personal handgun was, so last year Dad ponied up and got me the .460 Smith & Wesson. Now, if you don't know anything about handguns, here's a reference you might know. That famous speech Dirty Harry gave, something about the most powerful handgun in the world, it would blow your head clean off. Well, this gun is multiple times more powerful than that. It's kind of like shooting a rifle. It kicks like a mule, but you wouldn't want to be on the other end of it. Well, I managed to dive across the bed and grab the gun from the drawer and roll over on my back by the time these guys were making it through the doorway. That second creep who showed up at my back door just froze, put his hands up, and started backing away. But that other creep, the one from the Popeye's chicken place, apparently knows nothing about guns. He was still in full forward motion towards me when I let that first round fly. My aim was way off. I had aimed for center mass, the torso, but I hit him in the extreme upper inside thigh. No, I didn't shoot him in the junk. Although that would sound funny in one of these stories, but the truth is, it was really horrifying. This guy's leg just exploded as he got knocked mid-air like Johnny Knoxville versus a bull. Of course, I called the cops, but I spent a good 10 minutes in that bedroom, just me, shaking from what had just happened, and him crying and writhing around in agony on the floor. And I have to say, for a moment there, I saw this creepy, dirty, nasty, horrible man crying on my floor, and for a brief moment, I saw him as a human. I saw him as a little boy, if that makes any sense. I saw him as this weak and vulnerable person. Now, if he would have got his hands on me, I'm absolutely certain that he would have shown no mercy. And it does make you think about how people turn out like this and what events transpired in their lives to make them so cold and unfeeling and entitled to take whatever they see without regard for any other human. And it was a horrifying scene. And the sounds that came out of this man were just awful. They stuck with me. I can still recall exactly what they sounded like all the way up until he passed out. I'm not sure if that was loss of blood or shock or what. But anyway, that's my scary story. And if I may add two quick things, Number one, don't get me wrong. I'm very happy I was able to defend myself in that scenario, and I would do it again 1,000 times. Just because I can feel sympathy for another human doesn't mean I wouldn't think about doing anything different for even 1 second. To be clear, you should never mistake my kindness and my humanity for weakness. The other thing I want to add is I just want to say thank you, Dad. I love you, and I'll miss you this Christmas like I do every day of my life. Hey, how are you? I love your stories. I just wanted to let you know I go to sleep listening to them every night. A while back, you had a guy on your show who had a truly frightening experience in the forest while hunting. The guy who discovered he was being followed and saw the weird old naked guy. Well, I may be able to solve this one for you. I live in the vicinity of the Appalachians. I know, that's a huge area, but I think it's smart to stay vague when I'm talking publicly about a matter like this. Back in old times, crossing the Appalachians was really tough. Because of the way the mountains are laid out with the ridge lines that alternate back and forth, it was really tough for any traveler in horse and buggy days, but even in modern times, it's no easy feat to build a roadway through the area. Because of this, it became a great place for people to separate themselves from the rest of the world, a way for people with beliefs that didn't conform to society's standards to find a place they won't be bothered or subjected to the rules of the world at large. Supposedly, there are many groups of people, some large groups, some small groups, who have been isolated in these mountains for generations. Without coming right out and naming it, I work at one of the many hydroelectric dams out this way. For those who aren't familiar, the plant where I work turns the natural power of the Holston River into electricity. It's not one of the rigs run by the government, it's a privately owned dam, and because my job requires me to be close in case of emergency, last year I took up residence in a small cabin near the plant. Nothing fancy, basically it's a hunter's cabin, which is fine by me since I've been hunting most of my life. I'm comfortable in that minimalistic atmosphere. A few weeks after I had moved in, I started noticing that food was missing. I wasn't sure if I had eaten it and forgotten, or if a group of hunters had been breaking into my place while I was at work. Finally, after another couple of weeks, it became obvious. Every time I kept any food item in my house, anything, it would turn up with exactly one leftover item. For example, I bought a box of Pop-Tarts. Next day, all of them were gone, except one. I bought a pack of bacon. Somebody took all the bacon, except for one piece. My leftover pizza was gone, except for one slice, one pickle left in the pickle jar, one egg left out of the a dozen. I felt like whoever was taking my food thought that I would notice immediately if all my food was gone, but I wouldn't notice if there was one left. It had to be that, or, this is my other theory, this person somehow justified it in their mind that they were being kind to me by leaving me some food too. I immediately eliminated all members of Mensa, because either way I knew I couldn't be dealing with the sharpest bulb in the picnic. This was no rocket surgeon. This was also not a sustainable situation. I can barely afford food for me. I couldn't keep buying food for strangers, much less thieves. So I set up a trail cam inside my cabin and hid it under some dish rags by the sink. When I got home the next evening, sure enough, there was one Pringle left in the can. I checked the trail cam, and I got him. Or I got her. Either way, I got it. About 10 minutes after I left the cabin, there's movement by the front window, like somebody peeking in. A few seconds later, the doorknob on the front door jiggles for a minute, followed by the door creaking open very slowly. After a few seconds, this tall but very thin, grayish white thing steps into the cabin. It's got these long, skinny arms and long, skinny legs and a giant head. And just so you don't think this is a UFO story, it has tiny, beady little eyes that seem to be affixed too close together. Now, even though this thing is naked, I can't tell if this is a man creature or a girl creature. It's got all these lumps and rolls in very odd places. Just so you can further get a clear picture of what I was looking at, this thing had on no clothes at all and was extremely asymmetrical. Like somebody stuck stick arms and stick legs and a giant bald egg head onto a blob of biscuit dough. So this weird looking thing saunters over to the refrigerator and starts pulling stuff off the shelf. It eventually dumps all the Pringles into its mouth, but then removes one single chip from its face hole and puts it back in the can. This was the most disgusting and unnerving stream of weirdness I had ever seen. To tell you the God's honest truth, I was scared. This thing did look like a creature from another planet. And to see it there in my house with my stuff, eating my food, of course I felt violated. That night, I found a cozy corner in an empty office and slept at work. The next day, I enlisted a buddy of mine, Demos, from work to help me with my problem. When I first showed him the video, he thought I was joking. But when he saw my face, he knew this was serious. We talked for a while and we came up with a little plan. Demos suggested that because this thing was so weird, we should try to find out where it was coming from. What if there were more of these things out there? He also wisely suggested that we not just haul off and shoot the thing. I do think this thing demonstrated some human-like features, like being able to pick the lock on my front door, so I thought that was smart. So that Saturday, we put our plan into motion. I got up at the same time I do on work days. I got dressed and did everything just like it was a Monday. Then I left the cabin and met up with Demos, who had set up behind a boulder and some shrubbery where we could easily see the cabin. He also brought along our rifles and a taser gun and a couple of binoculars. And there we waited. We waited in that bush for 10 minutes. Nothing happening. 15 minutes went by, and suddenly, Demos nudged me. I looked through the binoculars, and it took me a second, but then I saw this thing. It looked more pink-colored in real life than it did on that trail cam, but about 10 times as creepy. Also, it was alternating between walking on 2 feet and crawling on all fours, similar to the way a gorilla moves about. This thing was peeking around the side of the cabin, lifting up to look through the window from time to time, and sometimes sniffing the air like a deer would when searching for danger. Now, understand I had put my phone on vibrate as to not disturb our tracking of this thing, but sure enough, my phone briefly vibrated as I received a text. This was nothing that should have caused any issues at all, but the moment that text came through, this thing just shot off behind the cabin. Me and Demos just looked at each other real quick and then jumped up, and the chase was on. I have no doubt in my mind this thing could have beaten us in a foot race, but the whole time it was running, it was making these real loud, crazy noises. The best way I can describe it is going between two main sounds: a pig squealing and the honk of a goose. We chased this thing for a good minute, but neither me nor Demos are in what you would call prime condition, so we were left standing in a clearing with our hands on our knees, panting and trying to catch our breath. The thing had gotten away. I would love to tell you at this point that we followed it back to its spaceship, or found a new species, or that it was a baby Bigfoot, or what have you, but the truth is a little more mundane than that, and at the same time a little more unnerving. Demos and I had talked about this to some people at work. One of those people was this guy named Brawley, but most people call him Pops. He's older than anybody else at the plant, and he spent his entire life in this area. When he heard us talking about this thing, he just looked up and said,
"That's the INBORNs."
"What?"
"That's the INBORNs. They've been in these parts for hundreds of years."
"And what's an INBORN?"
"Well, they were people a long time ago, but they've been isolated out here so long, living on nature, but at the same time participating in some very unnatural things. I almost got carried away by one when I was a toddler, but my granddad shot him."
"Why would they try to take you?"
"For breeding. Food, maybe. They ain't smart enough to use me for work or anything. They've been isolated for so long, and all those decades of inbreeding, they're practically a whole different animal than human. They were already dumb when their ancestors came out here way back when, but the way they are now, they're basically feral. They just as soon blink as eat their own brother. When I was a kid, we'd hear them whooping at night, making all kinds of racket, but I figure there can't be too many of them left. Supposedly, the government came in and tried to get rid of all of them back in the late 60s, early 70s, after an incident happened with a school teacher who lived down the road a piece. But you'll still hear them out there at night every once in a while."
Demos and I just sat there stunned, along with everybody else in the lunchroom. That was a whole bunch of insane knowledge to be dropped on a person at once. Is it true? I have no idea. But after what I've seen with my own eyes, it was enough to convince me to move out of that cabin and closer to town. So if you're still in touch with that guy who sent you the story about the creepy, wrinkled up person in the woods, I believe it's the episode called Meatlovers from December of last year, please let him know. He may have encountered something not quite alien, not quite cryptid, and no longer human. Let him know he may have had a mercifully rare encounter with what they call the INBORN.
I got my dog Missy when I was 10 years old. We got her from the rescue shelter, so we were never really sure how old she was. The only thing that we knew is that she must have had a terrible life. She was the most timid dog I'd ever seen. Even when I would move to pet her, she would flinch like she was about to be punched. Over time, Missy became more used to me and eventually understood that she could trust me. She still never barked, not even one time, and she would still flinch if other people tried to pet her. And I could tell that she would have nightmares too. When she slept, she would just let out these tiny whimpers and move her legs like she was running. She was there for me for my first date to come pick me up at the house, my graduation from high school, when I went off to college a couple of 100 miles away to live on campus. Well, when I went off to college, she got so sad and sick. I had to come back home on the weekends, even though I hadn't planned on being back so soon. On one of my weekend trips back home, I was at my parents' house by myself when my mom went on a grocery store run. I was sitting on the couch watching TV with Missy right beside me, my hand on her head, when all of a sudden she just quickly sat up and was staring at the door that goes to the garage. Then, for the first time ever, she started growling. That completely freaked me out. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. I had seen enough. I jumped up off the couch and I ran right out of the front door in my socks. Missy was hot on my heels. She looked happy, like we were playing a game. I ran to the neighbor's house, and I guess I had enough confidence in Missy that I had the neighbor call the cops. Well, I was standing out on the front porch with a neighbor, and I got finished calling the cops, and I looked down, and Missy was gone. I looked over at my house to the front door just in time to see Missy running into my mom's house. Well, the police showed up a couple of minutes later, and they got there just in time to see Missy dragging a strange man out of the house. A few days later after this, I had to take Missy to the vet. She was not eating properly, and in spite of getting so much love and so many pets from me and my family, the vet's best guess was that sometime while Missy was tracking down and attacking this intruder, the man must have kicked Missy in the side, damaging some internal organs. Another couple of days later, Missy was gone. I'm not one of those people who think that dogs or cats are babies. They're not. Human lives are just plain more important than pets. That's a fact. That being said, I will never have a better friend, a more trustworthy companion than Missy. I love you and I miss you. Thank you, Missy, for saving my life. You'll always have a place in my heart, and nothing will ever take your place.